This story comes to us from the New York Times. It's in. The jury's in on the final sentencing of the police officers from the George Floyd incident. Tu Tao, that was the police officer that was holding back everybody, going, no, stay back, stay back. And they wanted to go in and help George Floyd. Well, a judge in Minneapolis has sentenced Tu Tao to 4 years and 9 months in state prison. 4 years and 9 months. That's it. For what? He was found guilty of aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter. Now, like I said, this is the final sentencing, but 4 years and 9 months for, I don't know. I guess, well, because it's aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter, and it's maybe you don't get a lot of time for that. But they give you the background. I'll put a link to the story in the description box. They give you the background of it and what happened. If you don't know by now, where you've been. But they tell you what happened and how he was the officer that held back the bystanders from helping while Derek Chauvin acted like an ass and took the man's life. They do give you where the officers are now. So I'm going to give you a little update of where all those 4 officers are now. In 2021, the state jury found Derek Chauvin guilty of second and third degree murder, as well as second degree manslaughter for the killing of George Floyd. He was sentenced to 22 and a half years in state prison. A year later, he was sentenced to 21 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to violating the constitutional rights of George Floyd and a 14-year-old boy who was also black and was injured in a similar but unrelated encounter. See, Derek Chauvin was, you get it? Now some of you are going to go, why you got to bring race into it? But you make your own conclusions. Derek Chauvin is white. George Floyd was black. That 14-year-old boy was black. Both had negative encounters with Derek Chauvin. George Floyd's was fatal. Now, Derek Chauvin's federal and state sentences are being served concurrently, so together, and he is incarcerated at the medium security federal correctional institution in Tucson, Arizona. So any of you Arizona auditors that want to go out and do, there you go. But yeah, it's kind of interesting too. I'm looking at that. Well, I guess because it's federal, he's doing the federal time as well as the state time. But it was interesting to me that he went from Minneapolis to Arizona to serve time. I guess he's in the federal institute there. Why didn't they do 21 years in federal, and then when he gets released from federal, he goes back to Minneapolis and serves his state time? That's the way we wanted to see it done, right? No, he'll be out when he's an old man, hurting people again. Derek Chauvin appealed the murder conviction, arguing that he had been deprived of a fair trial for several reasons, including the district judge's decision not to move the trial out of Minneapolis. Now, several months ago, a Minneapolis appeals court upheld Derek Chauvin's conviction. They said, no, stay where you're at. In May of this year, he asked the Minnesota Supreme Court to review his murder conviction, but the court declined to hear the case. They're like, no. Now, according to the Associated Press, Derek Chauvin is planning on asking the U.S. Supreme Court to review his conviction. I doubt. It's just not political enough. Do you think the Supreme Court wants to be the ones to overturn Derek Chauvin's conviction? No, they don't want the Capitol building stormed again. Thomas Lane, that was another one of the officers who was there, who held down Mr. Floyd's legs, pleaded guilty to a state charge of aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter in May of 2022. Thomas Lane, who is also white, was convicted in a federal court of violating George Floyd's rights. He is concurrently serving 2 sentences for 2.5 years and 3 years at a federal prison in Colorado. So there you go. I wonder if he's at the same prison. Wasn't Timothy McVeigh in Colorado in a federal prison there? Somebody was, but I forget who. Thomas Lane. J. Alexander King, the officer who helped to pin down George Floyd, including by kneeling on his torso, was convicted in federal court in February of 2022 of violating George Floyd's constitutional rights. J. Alexander King, who is black, pleaded guilty to state charges of manslaughter in October of last year. He's concurrently serving a 3-year sentence and a 3.5-year sentence. Now, they didn't say where he's at. The 4th officer, Toe, who I just gave to you, after being convicted of depriving George Floyd of his right to medical care and for failing to intervene, hence the aiding and abetting. But in May of this year, he waived his right to a jury trial. A judge in Minneapolis ruled that he was guilty of aiding and abetting, and he was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in state prison. He will serve the state sentence concurrently with a federal sentence. So he has a 3.5-year federal conviction or sentence, and a 4-year and 9-month state conviction. He's going to serve those concurrently. So he'll be at the federal prison for 4 years and 9 months. Kind of sucks. They should have did the 3 years in federal and then said, okay, now you're going to be serving state time. That's what they should have did. They gave these cops breaks. I'm sorry, they did. Except for Chauvin. Well, they gave him a break too. He should have did 40 years. Anyway, I'm just going to give you this one little tidbit here on what's next, is that after George Floyd's death, Minnesota Department of Human Rights conducted an investigation and found that the Minneapolis Police Department had routinely engaged in racially discriminatory policing and had failed to punish officers for misconduct. City officials agreed to make sweeping changes in policing. And this year, the Justice Department released a scathing report from a multi-year investigation into the department, finding that it frequently discriminated against Black and Native American people, and it used deadly force without justification, among other things. Well, a lot of police departments do that. Are you investigating them too? But of course, Minneapolis officials said they would work with the federal government to negotiate a consent decree that would overhaul the police force. Yeah. Sure, like you overhauled the LAPD, but they're still, the LAPD. Like you would overhaul the NYPD, but they're still the NYPD. Department of Justice, looking at Phoenix Police Department. Are they changed? You know what I'm saying, guys?